Hey everyone, Kyle here, Climbing Majority. Just a quick reminder to please rate and review us on your favorite podcatcher. Also, please tell your climbing friends about this podcast, as word of mouth is the most powerful way for you to help us out. Today, in episode 16, we sit down in person with Jack Ryan, an adaptive trad climber and mountaineer, and the founder of Paralyzed Peaks. Jack is not your average trad climber. On November 29th, Jack's neck was crushed in an illegal move done by his blackbelt instructor during a Jiu-Jitsu sparring session. He suffered a broken neck at C4, C5, resulting in paralysis from the neck down, as well as numerous strokes due to blood clotting the following morning. He lost everything that day and has been fighting to regain it all ever since. Since his life-changing injury, and having never climbed before, he has begun to forge a new path in the world of adaptive climbing. In August 2020, in tandem with the founding of Paralyzed Peaks, Jack Ryan became the first and only individual with a spinal cord injury and incomplete quadriplegia to summit Mount Whitney, and is currently the only individual in the world with incomplete quadriplegia taking the sharp end on trad climbs. He has a large vision for the future, including several large technical mountaineering objectives, and aims to change the world's perception of adaptive athletes. Welcome to the show. Thanks again for subscribing and listening to what we got going on here. We're super excited to have our guest, Jack Ryan. That's what you'd like to go by, right?
Yeah.
Yep, Jack Ryan. Ran into him on Instagram a couple years ago and was super inspired by his story and just been following him ever since. And he reached out to me recently. He was in Tahoe and had this opportunity to have him on the show. We're really excited to hear his story and talk about everything that he has to offer. So welcome, Jack, and welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, super stoked to be here. So crazy story, like to fill in background on how like I know of Kyle. Kyle did Temple Crag, right? 2 years ago.
Dark Star,
right? And I had just done we forget Thousand Lakes.
Let me look it up real quick.
We'd done the Alpine Lakes right near Temple Crag and Dark Star. It was my first big like training overnight hike for Mount Whitney in 2020 in prep for my first attempt that got squashed because of fires and everything. And so I found Kyle. I was like looking at the Temple Crag like location.
Big Pine Lakes.
Yeah, Big Pine Lakes. I was looking at like the Big Pine Lakes like hashtag or like location or something, and Kyle's content popped up. I was like, because I was looking at Temple Crag and I was like, how sick would it be to climb that? And then I found his videos, and then I've been following him ever since. So his videos have been actually super informative to me as like a budding trad climber. So I've learned a lot from them. It's actually been really cool. So then like to finally actually be here and connected and is like super rad. And then on top of that, I found out Kyle's girlfriend, like crazy world we live in. Hannah's sister, Paula, we met in March of 2019 when I exited inpatient at Craig Hospital, and I started to get on like the dating apps. Mind you, I was still in a wheelchair at the time, like barely walking. And so I matched with Paula on Bumble when she lived in Golden, and she took me out on my first date where I was like totally disabled in a chair. Like,
wow,
took me to beer in Golden, like took me to Lookout Mountain, like took me to Red Rocks Amphitheater, like showed me around and was like super friendly, super kind to me. And then like we walk into Kyle's place and he's like, oh yeah, like this is Hannah. And then she's like, oh yeah, I followed you because of my sister. I was like, who's your sister? She's like, Paula Sarin. And I was like, I know that name. And so just like full circle, just connected a bunch of dots, which is wild. So
yeah, super crazy. I myself and Hannah included didn't even know that part of the story.
Yeah.
And so it's super interesting to have that come full circle.
Yeah. Wow. Just really, really crazy story about like you guys meeting and going through that, and also quite fortuitous and pretty interesting.
Yeah. It's almost like it's meant to be sort of thing, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, totally.
But to dive into the story, I'll preface it with like who I was before, and then we'll go into the accident itself and then a bit of the rehab process, but I don't want to go too deep just because it's like it could turn into like 2 hours long.
Yeah.
So who was Jack Ryan Greener before, right? Grew up in SoCal, spoiled San Diego kid. I tell everyone I had a silver spoon growing up, no shame in admitting it. I was comfortable. But my parents made me work, and they made me work hard. They made, like, I like to joke, if I wanted something, they made me do PowerPoint presentations to like earn the right to get that thing. So yeah, I grew up in Scripps in San Diego, and what didn't I do? I grew up in karate. I wrestled all through high school. Was like city champion. Was pretty decent at it. Didn't go to state or anything. Wasn't that good, but and also surfing. Surfing was a massive part of my life from the time I was about 4 or 5 years old. Grew up surfing with my dad and ended up surfing all over the West Coast as a teenager and young adult, from the North Shore of Hawaii to Baja Norte to Costa Rica to Nicaragua. And then on top of that, like was what most would consider like a waterman, right? So I was in multiple disciplines of like water sports. We had the surfing. I grew up like sailing to Catalina with some family friends, and that subsequently led to free diving. And so I also grew up free diving, and then that transitioned to spear fishing and lobster diving and backpacking as well. So I grew up hunting was a big thing, self-sufficiency, camping in the backcountry. And then that eventually led into like big mountain peaks, like prior to my accident. So I was very athletic. I traveled the world on my own dime, to my credit. Like I did put the work in and paid the money to do so. And I went into college in 2014 to San Diego State. I thought I was going to do computer science, thinking about the future, being logical about it. And then I got into like a class and I was like, fuck this. This is not fun. And like girls don't like this. being the ex frat star I once was. And I just realized it wasn't for me, and then found out about like sustainability, and then being the San Diego like surfer hippie kid that I grew up as, like sustainability made a lot of sense. And I was like, I want to save the world. Like I like green practices, like all this stuff. And then that manifested itself into surf tourism. So I always knew from the get-go, like in sophomore, junior year of high school, I was obsessed with Costa Rica and Nicaragua. But my dad wasn't as a hardcore surfer as I was. And so he never I was like, hey, can we go down like for my birthday or something? Like, no, we're not going to a third world country. And so I made it my mission through college. Like I spent 2015 as a surf guide in Nicaragua and did work trade down there. Determined that I wanted to run surf camps, and that was going to be my life. And so I spent my study abroad in Costa Rica studying environmental science and like soil and all this shit and like sustainable practices. And then 2018 rolls along and I'm getting ready to graduate at the end of the year. And I had lined up a job in Rosado, Costa Rica to teach surf professionally and do marketing work salaried in, Costa Rica, which if you have a salary job in Costa Rica, that's quite a bit of money. And yeah, the world was my oyster. I was in luxury real estate at the time in North County, like working 20 hours a week doing digital marketing. Like life could not have been much better. And classically, life also finds a way to kick you in the ass and humble you. And I'd been practicing jiu-jitsu for about a year and a half, just under 2 years, I think. And I transferred around gyms, but San Diego is like the mecca for jiu-jitsu outside of Brazil. Just as like the mecca for climbing is like Yosemite and like, I guess, Boulder, or like, what's the place in Salt Lake City? Not like Joe's Valley, like that area. There's just the mecca for jiu-jitsu, San Diego. And so naturally having grown up wrestling, having grown up in karate, like all that, it was just an organic transition. And when you enter a sport like that, just like with climbing, right? It's you go, oh shit, this is really hard, and I want to get better at this, or oh shit, this is really hard, I never want to do this again, right? And so there's those two types of people, and I fell into that first category of like, oh shit, this is hard, I want to keep doing this. So I've been training a bit, and I transferred gyms mid 2018 just to be closer to home and my apartment because, as we know, Kyle, like traffic in San Diego fucking sucks. And going in kind of like into the story of the accident, right? I have this like rehearsed at this point. So like day like any other, right? I wake up, I do my morning surf check, I check my like schedule and like study schedule for school. Like, okay, like I don't have anything to do for that. And then I check my like work schedule and like my marketing portfolio and all that. Like, okay, I have to do like one Instagram post and like put out an ad. I was like, all right, that takes like an hour, if that. And so I was like, cool, like I'm gonna go on a surf check, run up the 101, go to Swami's. Swami's was my home break, beautiful area. Realized like surf is garbage. Went to go grab coffee at my favorite spot, said what's up to the boys. Was like, did some journaling, did a bit of some affirmation work, some like, not a little bit of meditation. And then I headed home back to my place in Del Mar. And I was like looking at the clock, I had some oatmeal or something like that. And she's like, you know what, like I should go to the noon, like no-gi jiu-jitsu class. Like I haven't been to the noon class ever. I have time. It's like basically a day off. Like, let's just go train, get some good work in, have some fun. So went down to the gym and went through the standard, warm-ups, like moves, techniques, blah, blah, blah. And there was like more of a sparring heavy day. And one of these rounds, I think we had about 10 minutes left in the class. It was about 12:49 p.m. And I was in a protective position, like what we call turtle. So like you're covering your neck, you're covering your head, you're kind of like on all fours, like scrunched up. And yeah, what I thought was a bad takedown. My brain thought it was something else, but it turns out we have evidence of the video and whatnot. But he basically put his knee into the back of my neck, which is illegal, and then torqued me over. And so my body went, but my neck didn't. And he broke my neck at C4 and C5, giving me an incomplete spinal cord injury. We didn't know it was incomplete at the time. So I lost everything from basically the middle of my neck down, just gone. And the way I describe it to people is like, you get into a hot tub, right? And you just get this warm flushing feeling. It's the same feeling you get when you break your neck. Like, it's just this weird, warm, like from the toes up, it's really like everything just goes quiet, completely numb, and like really like warm and fuzzy. And I screamed out like, I can't move, I can't move. Cue 911, cue getting stripped down naked on the mats, put it on an isolation like headboard. I was in the ambulance, and I remember like starting to go into shock a bit and looking up at the paramedic who just had the biggest fucking ginger mustache you could ever imagine, right? And I was like, am I ever gonna walk again? Am I ever gonna walk again? And he's just looking at me, not saying a word. Like, worst case scenario, right? His job is just literally to keep me alive. And I know that in retrospect, but at the time I'm like, please just tell me something, right? And get carted to Scripps La Jolla ICU. Somehow, some way, my parents are on either side as I get pushed out of the ambulance. And by that point, I'm in shock, and I'm just apologizing profusely, like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen, blah, 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 blah. And they're like, you're going to be okay. Like, and they're saying that to comfort me. Literally, no one has any idea the hell and severity of what we're about to go through. Get carted in the ICU. They run a bunch of diagnostics. They determine like, okay, your neck's broken at C4 or 5. You have a spinal cord injury. We don't know how severe it is. And you have some internal bleeding from like the fragments in your neck, like cutting some stuff up. And the internal bleeding part is like a really important part because 13 hours post accident, that internal bleeding became clots, and that resulted in me having hemorrhagic stroke. So, and multiple clots passed through my brain. And the story goes from my nurse, who's like my dear friend. You watched the film, Justin. He had this gut feeling at the time as my nurse, like, he's like, for whatever reason, I'd been telling him all afternoon that first day, I was like, hey, something's wrong. And he's like, well, your vitals check out. Like, you're fucking paralyzed, but like, what are we going to do? I was like, no, like something's really wrong. And it all goes back to like that athletic piece of like, I was so in tune with my body and like, especially the freediving component. I credit freediving for not having a full blown like panic attack in the ambulance. Like the breathing techniques that I learned from freediving at 16 and like the performance freediving classes I took as like a birthday present has manifested itself in every aspect of my life, from like daily meditation to like rock climbing now, where I'm like able to really calm myself down when I'm on a lead. So to that end, like I was so in tune, and I was like really processing. I was like, there's something incredibly wrong here. And I kept telling him this. And 13 hours post, around like 1 a.m. on the 30th, woke up screaming bloody murder, just like, I'm going to fucking die. Like, it's over. Like, I'm done for. And he had this intuition to stay near me. So rather than being all the way down on the other end of the hallway, right, he decided that he was going to be in the one desk that was directly across from my room. Had he not been there, I would be dead. I wouldn't be sitting in this chair. Like the strokes would have probably left me brain dead, right? And I would have flatlined. And for all I know, I'm pretty sure I did at one point. And so he comes rushing in, runs a stroke diagnostic. I'm completely incapacitated. I'm gone. And cue surgeons, like emergency personnel, all these people coming in to basically keep me alive. So I got operated on for 9 hours from basically 1:30 in the morning till I think 10-ish. Was completely under. I vaguely remember like coming to, and this is something I need to go to therapy for, and Kyle and I were talking about this before, but I vaguely remember coming to in the OR where I just remember seeing like a halo of lights and like people operating and then like passing back out. And what happened was, the way it works when you're basically at death is they try to save your brain, then they try to save your critical organs, and then it goes your limbs, and then it goes like movement. Like movement's the last priority. And so the story goes, my mom got called in at about 2 a.m., is in the waiting room, surgeon comes up. My mom goes like, oh my God, like what's going on? Like, tell me he's going to be okay. She's like, your son's had hemorrhagic stroke. Things are looking, as you saw in the film, like you saw the surgeon, things are not looking
good.
Things are not good. They're worst case. It's like, I have to go in and save your son's life. My mom just throws her hands up and goes, okay, this is life in the ICU, right?
Yeah.
And that's the first 24 hours, like post accident. And I spent about 2.5 weeks in the ICU. After the operating, like they fused my neck, they removed all the clots from the back of my neck that were left over. I had to be intubated, so I had like a trach scar. Was on a ventilator, could not talk, could not breathe on my own, and just had my neck fused, completely paralyzed neck down. All I had were my eyes at the time, and like a little movement in my right arm. And so began the journey. That is this new body, and this new timeline and story. So we, as I said, 2.5 weeks in the ICU, things just kind of started to snowball, right? Like got some feeling back. The next thing you know, I have a toe. And then fast forward, I take a private medical jet to Craig Hospital in Denver. Next thing you know, I get a thumb back. And like the way I describe it to everyone is you're trapped in an ice block and you have no idea how that ice block is going to thaw. A quarter of that ice block could thaw, half of that, maybe more. You don't know. And so somehow, some way, like I just became hell bent on creating a miracle and like walking again. And it just happened to work out. Just happened. It's spinal cord injury is probably about 90% luck and 10% hard work. And anyone with like similar experience to mine will probably say the same exact thing. So it's gnarly the progress that I've seen. Is it surprising to me still? Yes and no. I'd already had such a foundational understanding of body mechanics and the nerve innervation and all that. Like, I think it definitely did help, but no one could have predicted the outcome that we continue to have.
Yeah, I think I want to rewind a little bit here. I think that first off, Max and I, we've talked about, our own personal injuries and just the shock of the situation that we find ourselves in the immediate aftermath of realizing that we're not, at some sort of stability. You have time to start processing things. It sounds like you immediately started to take the small wins. You're like, all right, cool. Like I got a finger, I got a thumb. Like you're already counting those small wins. And I think that's like a really important process of dealing with the trauma that you're currently in. My question is, and this is kind of a heavy one, when did the reality of your situation really hit you, and what was that process like, and how did you kind of like get a hold of that reality and turn that focus onto the small wins and realizing that you have to live in the moment and you have to take these small wins? Like, can you describe that mental process a little bit?
Yeah. So the reality dawned on me when I was coming off detoxing off fentanyl and oxy painkillers. Mm-hmm. Right. And so I got to Craig Hospital. I went cold turkey off all the painkillers. And that's when reality really started to hit. Like I came off that like drug induced high, mm-hmm. depending on, the dosages. And so that first weekend, it was my brother, my dad, my mom, and my brother's ex-girlfriend, all there. And I was in pain, immense amounts of pain. I shit myself twice in that first day or two. That was all loss of privacy, mind you. Like in ICU, you're conscious, but you're not. So like that loss of privacy doesn't really hold that much gravity. But the loss of privacy really struck me when I got to Craig Hospital, because I was like, I'm having a male nurse like wipe shit off of me and like put a suppository up my like rectum. Like that's a very real and raw experience that most men will never ever experience. And so like the reality really hit then. And so it manifested itself in like a lot of crying, a lot of like there was never a moment of why me. I never had that moment, but there was moments of just like I'm astounded this happened. Right. Like how is this even possible? Like this only happens to people you kind of know through the grapevine. This doesn't happen to like your son. This doesn't happen to your brother. This doesn't happen to like your loved one, And that was tough. And the little wins, I barely celebrated because the little wins were not big enough to signify normality
or progress.
Right. So those first, all through my inpatient stay, there was a night where I spent probably 3 hours on FaceTime, a really bad night where it was just my mom and I from like 7 o'clock in the night to like 10 o'clock at night, where I just screamed and howled and just bawled. And so she told me at one point in like the break where I kind of like ran out of tears, goes like, honey, like every time you cry, like you get stronger and you need to cry and you need to let everything out. And so I would. And that's how I handled the reality and processed it moment by moment. Is like, like as men, we're not taught to cry and we're not taught to express those things. But I grew up in a family of very strong women. And so I emulated what they did and what they told me. And so, yeah, I cried a lot. I'm a big proponent of that. I think it's one of the healthiest outlets a human, but especially a male, can engage in when in a secure environment. And that's how I handled the reality at the time of like, okay, I'm going to work my ass off. Like I'm going to become a professional athlete in rehab, but I'm also going to cry. I'm going to cry a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I was telling Max on one of these podcasts recently, like I've had moments like that too. And for me, it's been kind of delayed. In the moment, I was very much like, all right, I'm just going to get better. I'm just going to get better. Like that's all I'm going to focus on. And it wasn't until like I actually got back on my feet where I started to have this flood of emotions, and I just started crying and just feeling super down for no real reason, because my life had been pretty good up to that point. I got back, I'm on my feet, I'm walking around, like I have things to celebrate, but the reality of the situation and the trauma that I had gone through hadn't really been processed yet. And yeah, like that release, like you said, is, and crying and just like being open to giving your body that release is super, super important.
Yeah, I think for me it's kind of I don't know. I think maybe funny is the wrong word, but clearly the stigmatization of men showing their feelings cuts so deep, because like you even yourself are having to explain like that stigmatization. And it's like, dude, you like broke your neck, you almost fucking died. You know what I mean? Like you don't get to cry for that. Like what the fuck do you get to cry for? It's pretty absurd, right?
Yeah, right.
So yeah, I think that's pretty crazy. But for sure, like as an emotional outlet, just to let that go, must have been kind of in a weird way, like something powerful, maybe in hindsight, maybe in the moment, obviously, probably not feeling like that, but in hindsight, I could really see that. I'm kind of curious. I'm wondering, like, through this process, did your mindset take on like an era of positivity like early on, or did it really take you a lot of like suffering and misery, psychologically before you kind of came to this realization of like needing to feel positive and to have that outlook of like those small victories?
Yeah. So I was the rock for everyone around me. I didn't give myself the opportunity to feel bad for myself. I was just like, I had this. The first thought when my neck broke, right, it was like, oh shit, I can't move. The second thought was, I'm going to be okay. Whether that's divine intervention, if you're religious, if that's just a brain mechanism to cope with extreme trauma in the immediate moment. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not religious, but I just had this innate belief that I was going to make it out of it. And I've also had that innate belief even prior to the accident where I was like, I'm going to be wildly successful in whatever I choose. And it's just a matter of time. So that belief transitioned over into my recovery, and that like my family was like, oh yeah, you'll walk again. They told me like a year, 2 years later, like we didn't think we were going to even survive. They were planning my end of life plans that first week in the hospital, and had the injury been complete, right, and I would have lost everything like shoulders down, I was going to be offered assisted suicide. And by all means, I would have taken it. I have no shame in admitting it. To me, there would have been no point in living a life completely wheelchair bound on a straw, right? So I had that innate belief. I knew that I was going to succeed, and I became hell bent and made it my mission to basically be like, I'm going to prove everybody in this hospital wrong. I'm going to prove every single doctor wrong. I'm not only going to walk again, I'm going to excel past how severe this is. And, it's been 3 years now, 3.5 years later, like it shows.
Yeah.
It shows.
I think that the way you're talking about your mentality about this whole situation rings really true to the kind of mindset that I had through my injury and also through my life is, and Max and I have talked about this, is just the power of expectation. I think that I like to use that word a lot. I think that when we expect things to happen in our lives, and you use the word believe, that you knew to your core that it was true, and to me that's an expectation. You're expecting that to happen in your life, and I think that in itself is extremely powerful, because it doesn't really give you the option of having anything else. And so every decision you make moving forward leads you to that goal. And the universe has a very powerful way of supporting someone who has a pretty clear defined expectation for how they want their life. And it definitely seems like you use that in kind of the situation that you're in to manifest where you are now.
Yeah. And I just gone through like a big spiritual like breakthrough about 3-4 months prior to the accident. Like, complete mindset shifts, like really stop trying to be selfish about how I spent my time and my money with people. Like, there's this profound shift. And I'd already been kind of in meditation, but it really became a centerpiece for me. And then journaling too. So like the saying that came to mind of like that expectation of success, like the phrase that came to mind was like, I'm a millionaire and I've made $1 million. I just haven't made $1 million yet. Right. Like, I'm a multimillionaire. I just haven't made it yet.
Yeah.
Right. Of course, that's classic American idiom phrase, right?
That is very American. I'll give you guys
that. But I've always had that belief, right? If I make $1 million, great. If I don't, who gives a fuck? It's just all vanity. But yeah, it's that belief, that diehard belief, like. Every single day in therapy, I was willing to die. Like, I was willing to go to the very like edges of like consciousness. I did it every single day, where because your blood pressure, your pulmonary system gets fucked up. And so like when they put me in a standing frame the first time, they like slowly crank you up, and you can feel the blood drain from your brain.
Wow.
And you're like, my dad would watch me. He'd watch the color drain from my face, and I'd be like, keep going, right to the edge of consciousness where I'm like starting to pass out, and they'd be like, Barb, put me down. And then it'd sit me down really quick. Right.
Yeah.
And I did that every single day for 100 days straight, basically. And another funny part about like the losing consciousness part, they give you medical grade cocaine.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's actually a thing. It's parametine or something like that. It's literally a liquid cocaine. And
wow.
They, when you're starting to lose blood pressure, I would be like, get the nurse, like get him in here. And like one of my nurses, Ben, I'm like, Ben, give me the cocaine. He's like, it's not. I'm like, and I look at my dad. I'm like, my dad was in Chicago in the '80s, so he knows this. I go, he's like, you know this, and he just like, shut the fuck up. Like, you jam it up my nose. I'm like, I'm like, consciousness. And that was a regular thing for like weeks on end too.
So. Hell yeah. Hey, I mean, that's a good motivating factor to keep standing up.
Yeah, I was gonna say, no wonder this guy's so stoked to do this, like his ratcheting up. But back to that kind of like manifest destiny and that mindset. I was recently when I was I went to this alternative school when I was young, and there was this influential, I think he was like a youth worker or something like that, and his name is Peter. And he was really big into like outdoor activities and stuff. And he was whitewater kayaking, and he unfortunately got paralyzed from the waist down. But I actually just saw him the other day and kind of reconnected. And we went out for a coffee and we had a good conversation. And he was really just talking about kind of a similar thing to you, is that like your outlook and your perspective on life is going to really dictate so much. And there's so many things that just are terrible or are unfortunate. But if you have, two different universes and the exact same person, and they're undergoing this traumatic event, and one of them is just, willingly trying to have a positive outlook on the event in their life, and assuming that they have some level of agency in like making their situation better, whatever that means, that person is going to ultimately be happier and more successful and feel better, You know what I mean? And I think going through trauma or really dark times, you know, that kind of thing is really, really important. Mindset can in a way be everything, right? And it really seems like that was a really, really powerful avenue for you, obviously.
Yeah. Trauma magnifies your personality 10x.
I've never heard that. That's actually really cool.
Yeah.
So
that's really interesting.
My personality was already centered on meditation and journaling. I'd already done all the work.
Mhm.
I'd already been doing the work for a few years by then, right? So trauma magnifies your personality, and it magnifies the best of your personality, but it also magnifies the worst of your personality. And then that manifests itself in what we call PTSD.
Yeah.
So I think in my case, the trauma brought out the absolute best in me. And now on the flip side of that, 3.5 years later, I'm starting to see the more negative effects of it. And I noted to Kyle when we were having a bite to eat, I go, the past 2 or 3 months, my mental health has been a garbage can. I don't drink a lot. I'm not huge into substances. I've done it all, but like pretty relatively sober person by most accounts. And what's been bubbling up in the past 3 months is just been all this suppressed PTSD that has been manifesting itself. Like in the morning, like I cried in the morning yesterday before I went to work, and like I've been going to bed and like reliving various situations, right? So there is there's trauma is good, I think, in a way, right? But I'm personally dealing with the fallout of it currently, and it's tough. Like it's really tough, and I wish I didn't have to be that way currently, just given the current life situation and stuff that's going on that I can't openly discuss. But it is what it is. So
Yeah, I think that one thing I'd like to preface, and I think that this is super important for the audience to know. You were put in this situation by somebody else, and I think that that's like the hardest pill to swallow. I think that in climbing accidents, you do it to yourself for the most part. Whether you're hit by a rock, then it's the universe that just takes you out. But in general, it's our errors, it's our own mistakes that gets us into these situations. And in your case, it's quite the opposite. And I think that that's for me, if I were to put myself in your shoes empathetically, that is the hardest pill to swallow. Would you say that this kind of understanding of the fact that, the powerlessness and the victimization, not to say that you are like being a victim, but the fact that you are a victim in this kind of situation, is that part of this kind of PTSD that you're experiencing now? Has it taken this long for kind of the reality and the heaviness of that situation to hit you now, or was that something that you realized and that you processed earlier on?
it's slowly been bubbling, but I think it's come to a bit of a head in the past few months. Right. An example would have been last year. I was out for tacos by myself. I typically go get a beer and food on a weekly basis alone, once, if not twice a week, usually. And I was out and I thought I saw the individual who like did this to me walk into the taco restaurant. I was in the corner and I completely locked up. Right. I made the analogy that for better or for worse, like I am a rape victim. Like it's the same effects, it's the same loss of dignity, like the not blaming of the perpetrator, like all this sort of thing. And so when that situation occurred and I thought this person walked into the place that I was in, I literally could not move. I went into a cold sweat. I texted my friend. I was like, oh my God, like you have to come get me. I'm stuck here. Right. And it turned out it wasn't this person. It was literally somebody identical to this person.
Wow.
And he had sat down next to me. And I was like, oh my God, it's not this person. I just slowly walked out and then just bawled when I got home. So yeah.
Heavy stuff, man.
Yeah.
It's like, again, that's just like the hardest part for me is just the analogy that you said, like being a rape victim. You definitely are. And that's like just That's the hardest pill to swallow. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of preface that moving forward, kind of through kind of where we are now and moving forward, because I think it's such an important part of your story. Yeah, but yeah, Max, anything else on kind of the incident and the rehab before we move on to kind of a little bit briefing over his creation of Paralyzed to Peaks?
I think the only thing just to like touch on that is like I don't know if you've heard like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? But it's like physical needs, safety needs, belonging, esteem, cognitive needs, and then I think like aesthetic, and then self-actualization, and then it goes into transcendence, right? But you're like talking about processing this stuff psychologically, and it's like coming like years after the fact, right? And to me, I just think of like you go through that kind of pyramid. It's like step one is like those physical needs, right? And then step two is safety, and then like belonging and love. And it's like eventually, once you progress enough in your rehabilitation, you're going to get to that point of where it's like cognitive. It's like, okay, you no longer have these like immediate dumpster fires that you're like trying to put out, right? And so it's like, you're going to get to this point where like, okay, like, you're like things are going to set in, things are going to bubble up, things are going to come up, right, from such a traumatic event. So I don't know, just your story, and it kind of made me think of that and stuff. So.
That's a really great point. I'd actually never. I know, like I knew of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but like the way you just broke it down, and like I'm like, oh yeah, I'm right here.
Exactly, right. It's like once those immediate things you start getting and working through, you're going to get to a point where you actually have like time for that like reflection and that self, and it's going to set in differently, right? It just made me think of that, and then I thought it was an interesting point. But yeah, like Kyle's saying, we've kind of touched on like who you are and your history and your accident and your rehabilitation, and I think that's kind of pushing us into this project of yours, which is Paralyzed to Peaks, and maybe you can kind of tell us like how that came about, what was the thought process for that, and maybe like give people an understanding, because for somebody who maybe is listening right now, they don't understand how your recovery's been going and stuff like that, right? So maybe we can go through that process.
Yeah, so Paralyzed to Peaks originally started out as an idea called Peak Moments, and it started as a website where in 2020 I was like, I'm going to document my journey to going and climbing Mount Whitney. It had never been done with somebody with a spinal cord injury, never been done with somebody with incomplete quadriplegia, which to me is more severe than an incomplete paraplegic, because they retain their full body, but they retain all the upper body strength. So point being made, it had never been done. And so
could you just quickly explain what quadriplegia is for someone listening who doesn't know?
Yeah. So quadriplegia is if you have complete quadriplegia, wherever you broke your neck and there's severing or complete bruising of the spinal cord, you lose everything from that nerve correlation down. So at C4 and C5, had I been complete and my spinal cord severed or completely bruised to the point where signals cannot pass through, I would have lost everything deltoids down. So the only part on my body currently having an incomplete injury that is full strength are my traps. It's the only normal neurological portion on my body. Everything below that level of injury, from my deltoids to my hands, to my arms, to my legs, like hips, back, everything is neurologically affected and paralyzed in some capacity. And that's what makes an incomplete spinal cord injury. So an incomplete spinal cord injury and an incomplete quadriplegic spinal cord injury means that signals can bypass the bruising in my neck on the spinal cord, but they are rerouted in a way that it results in muscular weakness, severe limp. I walk with a cane, lack of function in my bladder, lack of function in like sexual health, lack of function in my bowels. Kyle and I climbed before this. I kind of gave a breakdown of how I climb. Like, I don't really have a core. I don't have much of a chest. I have full function in my left hand, but it's still considered weak. And I have like 3/4 function in my right hand, no index finger. And much of my like thumb and whatnot is paralyzed. So, and then like left arm, if it's locked out, like on a roof, I can't pull with the bicep, but I have to pull with like my rear delt and like what little lat I have. My lats are pretty much paralyzed, right? But on my right arm, I can pull with that and have full strength on my right arm. And then it's a different equation with my legs, my hip flexors, and everything below. So I can walk, but I am dramatically impacted. And the way I'm perceived in public is it would look like somebody has a severe knee injury or severe ankle injury. And I get that quite a bit where it's like, oh, you're a veteran. Like, did you get blown up or something? And I always go, shit, I wish I did. But yeah, it's very confusing, and it's very hard for the human brain to process that an individual was as severely injured as I was, paralyzed as I was, and as close to death with stroke and brain, lack of brain function as I was, and be able to be walking. And when you talk to a surgeon or a nurse who has a general understanding of these things, every single one of them goes, you should be dead. You should not be here. I don't know how you're doing what you're doing. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, there's people that walk post incomplete spinal cord injury, like, right? Whether it's paraplegic, right? Which paraplegic is basically abs down, depending on where you break in your back. But with quadriplegia being so high up in the cervical column, the likelihood of the recovery that I've had is like 0.001%. It's like, it's not
possible.
It's at the fringes.
Yeah.
It's at the fringes. So that's kind of the breakdown of like what incomplete quadriplegia is and kind of looks like.
Totally. Yeah. No, thanks for clarifying that, just for, anybody who's listening, like kind of doesn't understand the limitations or the difference of that. But yeah, so, kind of, you're talking about that, you're getting through your rehab process, and we were talking about, Paralyzed to Peaks.
Yeah. Yeah. So Paralyzed to Peaks came about, as I was saying, like it was originally Peak Moments. It became this thing where I started documenting my journey to Whitney. I get a call from my buddy Chase Viken. Chase was a pledge, actually, of mine in college. So I used to be about 200 pounds and just jacked to the fucking tits. Ex-power lifter, like just really large human and scary human, right? And I was also like pledge coordinator in my frat for like 2 years before I dropped. So I was like, this is fucking dumb. But Chase was one of my pledges, and I watched him go from shooting like frat parties and like sorority portraits and that sort of thing to going and shooting for like these big brands. So in 2020, I kind of been posting on Instagram. I was like, hey, like I'm going to go do Mount Whitney. Like, I don't care if I get sponsored. I'm just going to go do this because I want to do it. And I think I can. And so he calls me up. He goes, hey, like I'm working for this watch company called Vincero. I'm one of their new photographers. They're doing this contest called Chase Your Legacy. And if you win, we'll give you $5,000 and we'll make a film out of the whole thing. And that's how like the film came to be. So then fast forward, I won. I blew everyone out of the water with my submission. And Vincero was just like over the moon. Like, this is like one of those very rare stories that we're just lucky to happen upon. And so we're in San Diego and we're doing like a brainstorming session. And Sam Newton, who big YouTuber, big photographer, like is now a Canon ambassador, like has seen his career just skyrocket in probably the past 3 years, was going to be the creative director on the Peak Moments project at the time. And so we're doing a brainstorm session. We're like, Peak Moments just doesn't have the same oomph. Like there's no, like, it's like, we get it. Like everyone wants to have a peak moment on top of a large mountain or on top of a climb, but it's like, it doesn't really describe where you've been and what you've done and what you've gone through. And so in that session, like Sam goes, we need to change the entire like trajectory of this piece. Otherwise it's going to fail. And he sat there for a second, and the man's a branding genius and like marketing genius, goes, Paralyzed to Peaks. And everyone in the room just goes, oh, fuck. That's it. That's the film name. That's everything. Like, that's literally what we're going to call everything. And I went from having my Instagram name being like, I think it was like Jackson is here, to like switch it over to Paralyzed to Peaks. And that's when it was born. Yeah. So
now was the Paralyzed to Peaks and everything, it seems like it was centralized around this objective of Mount Whitney. Is that correct?
It was.
Did you guys have any further vision for where this might go or what might become of it? Or was it singly focused on this objective at the moment?
In that current moment, when we came to that conclusion of we should call this,
Yeah.
It was on that singular objective. Now, when we sat on it and, week, 2 weeks later, and I really thought about it, I was like, this could be bigger than just like a singular mount. Mm-hmm. There's something else here. And I've just been letting it organically grow. Like, it's a little just like infant right now. We have it's like 1 year old, 2 years old, right? And it's the vision I see for it is, Hal and I sort of discussed this before, is like, it could be a nonprofit, right? Working with spinal cord injury individuals in rehab. It's also a speaking topic and like taking that fear, like paralysis and the fear that comes with it, that every individual goes through in terms of like, before you go through some big transformation, right? You're on this like precipice of like, you're terrified. You don't know if you should start this business. You don't even know if you should start this podcast.
Yeah.
Right. But then you get over that like paralysis analysis, that fear and whatnot. And you just, this is horrible. Dive head first. Dive head first into it. Right. And that's where like the speaking side of things comes in. And so I've done probably 7 professional speeches now, and I'm hoping my next one is worth a couple grand. We'll see. But I've been letting it organically happen. And then I think the nonprofit, the speaking, the third one is, the personal brand and leveraging that with climbing brands and outdoors brands. Be like, hey, like, this is a story. Adaptive athletes are here. Right? Like, we're here, we're out doing gnarlier shit than Seb Boone on 515D or whatever, right? Like, and we're doing it with a gnarly disability where we should be dead. Like, no discredit to him, right? But we're here.
Yeah.
We're doing gnarly shit. And like, this should be acknowledged. This should be appreciated, because 1 in 4 Americans are disabled. That's a large part of the population. So that inclusion piece and that visibility piece, it's apolitical, right? So when we think about it from a marketing dollars perspective, when you think about it from a business perspective, for better or for worse, it is apolitical, because it's just, you're disabled. Like, doesn't matter what color, gender, whatever. It's just, I'm an amputee. I have complete quadriplegia. I'm in an electric wheelchair. I have fibromyalgia. Like, all these different disabilities. And, we're here, we're out in the outdoors, we're out climbing. We're very few of us, but they are like, we're pushing the boundaries where we can. And it's worthy of notice. It's worthy of, I think, dollars, quite frankly. And there needs to be more of a narrative around it.
And I'd like to rewind a little bit. I think that, we said this at the beginning of the podcast. You weren't a climber before this incident. You said you had visions for the tops of peaks, but after we've talked a little bit, you have gotten into what we call technical climbing and technical lead trad climbing, and I think that's really what sets you apart from the rest of the people in your peer group. Can you kind of run us through and run the audience through a little bit of why climbing is appealing to you, especially on the technical side of it, rather than, hiking up a mountain, but actually roping up and taking the sharp end and assuming that risk, even with the kind of risk that you're already running. And you said that while we were talking, you said that someone from Mesa Rim in kind of an outreach group had reached out to you. Like, I guess, well, I'm jumping ahead of myself here. Let's just answer the first question.
Yeah. So hiking for me is like, we got the Whitney project done and I was like, great, it's done. Like, I'm not actually a huge fan of hiking. Like we say hiking is an approach without a crag and that equals depression.
Yeah, hiking is an approach to nowhere.
Yeah. Right. So I never climbed before. I just had, it was on my radar. I was like, I want to climb. Like, but I had jiu-jitsu, I had surfing, I had free diving, I had spearfishing. I literally had no time left after I did all these other things. So what happened was I put a post out in 2019 going, I am an athlete. I am worthy of doing sports still. But I have no idea what to do. Who can help me? And all these people chimed in. And this one woman named Jillian Yatsko out of Mesa Rim in San Diego DMs me and goes, hey, I think you're a great candidate for rock climbing, adaptive climbing. I go, okay, like, we're going to give this a go. Like, I'll drive down there and we'll try this out. And so I hop on like a 5'4", 5'5", like jug haul. I get halfway up and flail on it for over an hour. And I just, as I kind of said in the beginning of the podcast, it's like there's two types of people where they try something and they're like, okay, I want to keep doing this even though I suck. Or there's the other person who goes, I suck at this. I don't want to do this. So classically, I go, I suck at this, but I think there's something here. And my hands are bleeding everywhere and everything hurts. And I'm not okay, but I'm going to go limp out of this gym and try again in like 3 days. I became obsessed. And that has now resulted in, taking the Sharpen. I started sport leading in January. No, not January 2020. January 2021, February 2021-ish in the gym. And now we're doing trad. I'm a budding trad climber. I have one successful lead under my belt and several failed leads. Right. But there's no one doing what I'm doing on the Sharpen with my disability. I am one male and there is one other female, but she does not climb trad and her injury is C7. So she actually is stronger in her upper body, but she has no social media presence. So I'm really the only one. And there's only one other individual with quadriplegia who's doing like big mountain peaks. His name's Ed Jackson. I have the utmost respect for the guy. Him and I chat on a semi-regular basis. Good human. He's really pushing the envelope in mountaineering and alpinism, but he's not on the Sharpen. I'm the only one on the Sharpen. So that's become a thing where like I spent 2 seasons in the Valley last year in April and October, spring and fall. And every single time I go, I level up, and I'm actually going to Yosemite tomorrow, and I'm hoping to put up Pine Line, which is like a 5'7" hand and finger crack right at the base of Fell Cap. I'm hoping I have Granny Crack, which is next to Yosemite Falls. That's just underwater currently. That was an unfinished project from October. I have Ranger Crack 5'8", which is right around the corner from Granny Crack. And then I'm hoping to do After 6 or After 7. They're basically the same, just 2 different starts on multi-pitches. Hopefully in the next week or so. If not, we'll do it in the fall. And then the biggest goal, and I think from a personal branding perspective and where I see Paralyzed Peaks going on the technical side is we're going to put up one lurking fear on El Cap on the far left end of El Cap with my friend Brant Hissel. Shout out Gravity Labs. His YouTube channel is phenomenal.
I just found Gravity Labs. They are so good. I love them. They're so good. They're both so funny too. Like I've just been crushing their videos. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Jake and Brant. Brant's a dear friend of mine, and I'm dear friends with his girlfriend as well. One, like just solid humans. 2, gnarliest climbers ever. And they do it in such like a happy-go-lucky way, but like
totally. Yeah.
Him and I have just been bouncing video ideas off of each other. So him and I are hoping to put up Lurking Fear potentially this year. And then the goal would then to go put up the Nose. So to fill in a bit of history there, because climbing is big on history. The only individual who has a spinal cord injury who has successfully summited El Cap is Mark Wellman. He's a paraplegic. He basically jugs the entirety of El Cap.
5,000 pull-ups or something?
Yeah, on a follow. The second individual who attempted it, Rand Abbott, who's somebody I would consider a friend and somebody who I converse with on a semi-regular basis, is also paraplegic. He is the pioneer, I would say, for adaptive aid lead, and has multiple 513 and 514 aid leads in Joshua Tree. The only person who has them.
Oh, shit.
And so he attempted to do the nose last October when we were actually both in the valley, and unfortunately had grand mal seizures and had to bail. So it's yet to be done. If Rand beats me to it, all props to him. I'm in full support, and he has more experience than I, but I would like to claim that title of having the first adaptive aid spinal cord injury lead on El Cap, top to bottom, on multiple pitches. So I think it's possible. I know it's possible. It's a matter of building the skill set, risk tolerance, and putting the time in. And I think any great climber knows, whoever that spent time in Yosemite, you just have to grind and you have to put the time in. And I determined at the end of fall season last year, I was like, this is going to be my life for the next however many years of just spring, fall, spring, fall, spring, fall. And I just made that decision. And thankfully I have a collective of friends and broader acquaintances that also have made that decision. So that's where I see Paralyzed Peaks going as a whole, is that really technical big wall climbing.
Yeah. Wow, man. So fascinating, and just really, really, really cool project. And, I think just tying back actually a few things, one, when you were mentioning earlier that 25% of the population is, disabled in the US, and it was almost like a case, take the the narrative of extending a hand and helping someone who's disabled or something out of the equation, purely from a capitalistic point of view. There's just a whole market for this, you know what I mean, that doesn't seem to be I didn't know any of the names that you've been talking about or anything, right?
Right.
So just purely from that standpoint, seems like a really missed opportunity, right? Of I think what you said earlier was was it disabled people have arrived for climbing, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and Rand's been really pushing that narrative.
I'll have to check him out.
Yeah, but the thing is, there's a massive push for inclusivity in climbing.
Yeah.
Right? We can all admit that. We're three white guys on a podcast right now.
For sure, yeah.
And that has to be said.
Yeah.
And so the diversity and seeing people of color come into the community and be accepted and pushed in the general greater narrative, by all means, I think is phenomenal. I am full support. Seeing the queer community being pushed and being accepted in the community, fucking love it. It's phenomenal. The issue is that I've seen those other communities, and it's not to pit one against the other, but those communities are questioned for the space they occupy, not the skills they possess. The disabled community is questioned for the space they occupy and the skills they possess, right? Because every disability is completely different. My disability on you looks way different. Your outcome is way different. We don't know, right? So the biggest thing for me is I've been working with the AMGA through the first half of this year to I want an affinity course for disabled climbers to seek, single pitch instructor certification. And there's already amputees that have done that. Santi over in Utah, he's already an AMGA SPI certified guide. There's one or two others I can't name off the top of my head. There are disabled guides, right? But to that end, it's not widely seen. There's not a curriculum built around it. And so my goal from a non-professional passion, just a passion project perspective, is I don't want to send 5'10". I'm happy being a 5'7", 5'8", 5'9" climber for the rest of my life. whether that's aid, French freeing, or freeing in general. But if I, as a disabled individual, am able to go out with other disabled individuals, like go, hey, this is possible for you too. Let me be the beacon of light for you, so then you can pursue it and then open up that and become a beacon of light yourself to other disabled individuals. I think that's where legacy comes in, and that's where uplifting everyone comes in. And that's what I'm really passionate about right now.
Yeah, so I think this is really kind of hitting the nail on the head of kind of where I wanted to ask this question is, so Paralyzed to Peaks is definitely focused around your own personal journey and your aspirations in terms of climbing. And I like your vision in terms of how that is going to actually motivate and inspire people in your community to do something similar. You kind of touched on it a little bit, but how do you see, this particular organization, Paralyzed to Peaks, and the message and the vision you're creating through the actions and the documentation of the story that you're creating? Like, what is, like, this person from Mesa Rim reached out to you, and that's the reason why you're climbing right now, is because this person reached out to you. Like, do you see an easier pathway, an easier channel for people like yourself to find climbing? Like, is it needed to be promoted in gyms? Does it need to be a social change? Like, where do you see this kind of like inclusivity being promoted and easier for people like you to find without having to be, you seemed like you searched for it so advently. It's not a word, whatever. Yeah, like, people who might not be searching for it as much as you, how are they going to be able to stumble upon this, and how is this able to be presented to your community in a better way?
Right. So I'll say this: I am not a pioneer in the broader sense of adaptive climbing. The pioneers in adaptive climbing are organizations like Paradox Sports, right? It's pioneers like Mo Beck, right? Amputee, first 512 climber, Real Rock. Like, credit goes to Paradox, to Mo, to Rand. Like, I'm just one little piece of the puzzle, and I don't want to take shine away from, those pioneers and like people have really pushed adaptive climbing as a whole. I see Paralyzed to Peaks as another puzzle piece to that, in that I think Paradox Sports is big on pushing adaptive climbing in gyms across the US. That's Jillian Yatzko, who was the reason I got into climbing, was and is part of Paradox Sports. And she, brings people in like me to go climb. So there are avenues there. Where I see Paralyzed to Peaks as of right now is really pushing the narrative around the SBI certification and getting somebody like me or somebody like Shane Farber, who's a paraplegic, potentially Josh Urata, who's been on the podcast, right, to be guides and pioneers and bring other paralyzed athletes or disabled athletes out to the crag and being like, here's how you do it in like the adaptive way, right? Like, when I climb, it's so dependent upon limbs, right? Like my hand function, my arm function, my leg function, my hip flexor function. How do I pioneer that and adapt it to work in my favor? So if that means free climbing on my left side, because that's the more functional side, and then French freeing or aiding on my right side, if I can translate that to another paralyzed individual or somebody with physical deficiencies, to get them to be like, oh, I can lead climb now. I can confidently and safely do this. That's my mission currently. And that's where I see Paralyzed to Peaks going. We're right at the precipice, but I feel like we did the Whitney project. Like I said, it's done. We proved that could happen. Now it's backing it up. We have a main story here. Now we need chapters. And so currently I'm slowly adding to those chapters. And then eventually we'll have a book. And that book is, this is what Paralyzed to Peaks has done for the adaptive community. On top and building on the shoulders of those pioneers like the Rand Abbotts, the Paradox Sports, the Mo Becks, those types.
Do you see Paralyzed to Peaks potentially opening up a foundation, kind of like what Alex Honnold did, and channeling funds like that to these organizations that you spoke about?
Yeah, I don't have a clear vision on it though, candidly. I wish I did. But like I said, it's in its infancy. It's in its like second or third year, and I I'm a big proponent of not forcing things. Um,
That's cool. Yeah, I'm just
yeah,
kind of thinking outside the box here and seeing where your head's at. But yeah, it all is super inspiring and really really cool. I think you have such a unique story and such a unique offering to the community. I'm super excited to see where it goes.
Yeah, I think even on my end, like this has really not been something on my radar of like, adaptive sports, especially in climbing and stuff. So I just think, yeah, it's like it's such a cool idea, and so like a total no brainer, and I wish I'd known more about this, but you're obviously pushing the good word here. So I think that's really, really cool. And kind of also as well, like I think we obviously focus on as a society. You were talking about Seb, sending his DNA project or whatever 515D, right? But like how hard something is totally relative and subjective to the individual, right? So like somebody who has your limitations, like for all we know, climbing, like I don't want to put like words in your mouth, or I've never climbed with you, but like climbing 510 might be as hard, like free climbing 510 might be as hard of a task as him sending his 515D project, if that makes sense, right? So
yeah.
it's all just like perspective and relative to like the individual's limitations and stuff. So I think that's also a really, really interesting thing of just like a mindset to shift, like how to look at that and like what that person is overcoming to actually like go do that. It's really fascinating to me.
Yeah, it's tough, right? Because I battle able-bodied voices. Like there's a dichotomy of voices in my head. There's the able-bodied side and there's the disabled side. The able-bodied side logically knows that. I had this conversation with Brant, Gravity Labs, like 2 nights ago. I was like, dude, if I was able-bodied, you and I would be equals and we'd be climbing big walls together. I was like, I have the same obsessiveness knowing myself in jiu-jitsu and surfing that you have about climbing, and we would be partners. He's like, oh, I see that, dude. Like, I totally understand. And that's the able-bodied side. So there's an ego component, but then there has to be an ego death on the disabled side, right? Where I have to admit myself, like when I watch Brand's stuff, I'm like, I am never going to climb Romulan Warbird. I'm just not. It's just never going to happen.
Yeah.
So I have to determine, okay, what's my Romulan Warbird? What's my free rider? And assessing, okay, we're going to push the envelope, but it's just going to look different. And that's also a very tough pill to swallow. Because if you look at me and you sat down at a bar, you would have no idea that I have the strength of a 9-year-old with no climbing experience.
So,
yeah. I think that this topic is super cool. I think that James Pym really put this into light. He recently had a pretty traumatic injury. He fell 80 feet. We just launched this episode 2 weeks ago, and he was climbing 8B plus, super hard routes. And, this injury is pretty catastrophic for him. And there's a chance that he might not be able to send the same grades that he was before. But in his eyes, that's not what climbing's about. I think he put a really, really cool perspective on chasing grades. And he's like, grades is just the outcome of our effort and our love for climbing. And it's different for everybody. And he says now, like, if I'm not able to climb 8B plus anymore, that's okay, because I'm still going to be able to try as hard as I was before. It's just different now. And so we're still able to identify and pick out this effort and this love for climbing that we have based on just the level of difficulty and what we get out of climbing in general. It's not about the grades. It's about the personal struggle, and it's about the experience that we get out of climbing. And this kind of brings me to my question, like, what does climbing offer you? It's like, why is climbing such a draw to you? And I specifically mean more technical climbing, and especially being on the sharp end and exposing yourself to risk. Like, what about that do you love?
I love that I constantly push the envelope and I constantly surprise myself, right? I send 510A in the gym. Granted, grades are, subjective, right? But I sent 510A in the gym on lead, and I was like, wow, I didn't think I would ever send that. I did. I was like, same thing. I led the final pitch on Swan Slabs, that just bomber hand crack. And I was like, wow, I never thought I would lead a trad route, right? I'd cleaned routes. And then prior to that, I was like, I thought I'd never clean a trad route before, right? And then on the sports side, I was like, after I started leading sport outdoors and indoors, I was like, oh, I'll never know how to like clean and master the basics of sport, like rappelling and all that sort of thing. And I'm like, here we are. Like I have a basic foundational understanding of it. So it's the pushing the envelope on the technical side and surprising myself constantly where I'm like on my day where I'm like, I didn't think I could do that. Like I was in Holcomb Valley a month ago with a group of people I'd never climbed with. I fixed all the ropes on grades between 5.4 to 5.8. I didn't finish the 5.8 route, but everything below that from 5.7 down, I did. And I fixed the ropes for it. And I was like, I'm a disabled individual setting ropes for able-bodied individuals on routes that I never thought I would set the ropes on. Right. Like constantly surprising myself. And that was a big mindset shift of like, okay, I have the skills now. Like I have a basic understanding of these things. I can always be better. Don't get me wrong. But like I get it. Like I can do these things. And that day specifically in Holcomb Valley, I sent by Cracky. I had one take, and by Cracky's like an ultra classic out there. And I was like, I can't believe I just did that. Like super exposed. I was like, wow, I have a foundational understanding of what sustained 5.7 is, which means I know I can climb a 2-move 5.8, right? So constantly surprising myself on the technical side is like my favorite part. Because just when I think I'm hitting the limit, I'm like, oh, I just hit a new level. On the broader sense, climbing for me is about community. I love the community. Like I have so many friends. I've like met you, Max. Now I've met Kyle finally in person. I've met Brant. I've met Brittany. I've met Cam Pack out in Moab. Like all these like different climbers and people. And like I've had conversations on Instagram with like Conrad and all like just all these amazing people that you never think you would ever converse with. I'm like, oh, I've had a brief conversation here and there. I made connection and made relationships. And the community aspect is so important because with jiu-jitsu, it's such a niche community. In jiu-jitsu, everyone kind of knows each other somehow, some way, whether through media or through the grapevine, 1 degree separation. And so when I lost jiu-jitsu, it was really about, before the technical piece came in, it's really about finding community. And that's what climbing has replaced jiu-jitsu in the community component, while also taking the technical component in as well, right? Jiu-jitsu is very technical. Climbing is very technical too. If you fuck up in jiu-jitsu, you get hurt if you don't tap, right? If you fuck up in climbing, you're breaking your leg, unfortunately for this guy. So like the inherent risk that we've discussed is still there. And I was just looking for it in a different outcome that I could do physically still. I can't do jiu-jitsu. I can't surf in the traditional sense ever again. I just don't have the strength. I don't have the explosiveness. So I needed climbing community piece first. And then now the technical piece has come about. And I think that's like the most beautiful thing in the world, that I was able to go from one community and being like semi well connected to going to another community and being like well connected and being able to have these conversations we're having right now.
Yeah. Oh wow. I mean, I think that's a pretty awesome place to end it if you guys are good. Do you have anything else?
I mean, I think we were kissing a little bit on the risk topic. We can cut this out if we don't really fish into anything, but I'm curious on your I guess let me preface this a little bit. So in this podcast, we've talked a lot about risk and how it's kind of built inherently into the sport. And we see a lot of media videos like free solo or risk is glorified. How much do you feel risk really plays a role in the sport? And do you feel like the sport would be the same without it?
I don't think it would be the same without it. The way I look at risk in my personal day-to-day like climbing journey, my margin of error compared to like, say you, Max, or you, Kyle, like is exponentially smaller. So I have to be that much more calculated when I think about leading a group. I have to think about, okay, if I fall here, what's the outcome of that fall 6 feet below? Whereas when you're out on a sport route, like, okay, you take a fall and maybe you ding your shin. For me, it's like I told Kyle earlier, if you deck, you bounce. I thud. I won't move. Something will happen, right? Mm-hmm. So I am actively hyper calculating down to the millimeter my risk tolerance. So like when I got my first trad lead in last October, I had already run that pitch 2 times prior. I already knew what to expect, right? And I already had a general understanding of where to place my gear and where to clip in and where my rest spots were, right? So climbing is inherently risky. To that end, one person's risk, like high risk, is another person's normal and standard. And we get to dictate what that standard is. So, and to go broader, one person's extreme is another person's normal.
Totally. Nice. Well, Jack, anything else that you feel like we missed or anything else you'd like to add?
I'm going to send Lurking Fear.
There we go.
That's going to happen. And then I'm going to send the nose at some point in some form. And I would like to get the first paralyzed aid ascent on one of those, if not both, on lead, at least for a few pitches to claim it. And that's my goal. I think that's the next frontier is Big Wall. And that's what I intend to do. And we'll see how it plays out and what that looks like in 6 months and a year or 2 years down the line. But I know it's possible, and that is the future. And I'm hell bent on making it happen and doing, once again, what somebody has never done before. So that's my ending note. I think that's my biggest goals beyond, single pitch trad and sport stuff. So
yeah, hell yeah.
Yeah, man, that's awesome. For anybody listening, like how can they tune into your story? Where can they go to be a part of this and watch your success in the future?
Paralyzed to Peaks on all channels. So Paralyzed to Peaks on Instagram, Paralyzed to Peaks on LinkedIn, because I'm also pretty decent at my profession. So I use LinkedIn a lot. Paralyzedtopeaks.com, my website, kind of just outlining my story and also my photography work and some of my accomplishments and podcasts. And then that's it.
Yeah.
Those 3 channels.
Yeah, we'll put all the links in the description, so it'll be easy to find. Definitely recommend watching his video on his ascent of Whitney. We didn't really cover the details of that ascent, just because it's been covered so much so far. But that video is super inspiring and really does a great job in terms of cinematography and covering the story of everything leading up in terms of the details of your accident and then or your injury. What would you call it?
Both.
Yeah. And yeah, just the details of that ascent. How many days was it up, Whitney?
It was 4.5 days total, 40 miles, 8 or 9,000 feet of vert, I think, via the JMT PCT. Summited August 7th, 2021. So yeah, did what was never done before.
Yeah, first of many.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
Hopefully.
Yeah, awesome. It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you and getting introduced to your story and stuff. And I totally look forward to seeing more from you in the future. And who knows, maybe one day in the future, if I make my way down to the US, it'd be pretty rad to share a rope with you one day.
Yeah, man. I was telling Kyle, I was like, BC has been on my list for even prior to my injury. I wanted to surf in BC and go find some orcas and shit. But now it's like, no, I want to go to Squamish.
Yeah, man. Come up anytime. Give me a ring. I really mean it. I'd love to, hang out, share a rope, do anything, just let me know.
For sure, man. Yeah, no, stoked. I'm really stoked we could do this, connect everyone here. And thanks for the opportunity.
Oh yeah.
Totally, man.
Awesome.
Yeah.